All right, guys, this is deductive reasoning. Okay, so deductive reasoning is different than inductive reasoning. I kind of touched on this in the inductive reasoning video. But we are going to be focusing on the laws of detachment and syllogism. So the law of detachment and the law of syllogism. It sounds scarier than it actually is, I promise. Okay, so unlike inductive reasoning, deductive reasoning deals with facts, rules. Oh, let me highlight that. Facts, rules, definitions, properties to reach a logical conclusion. Okay, so right here I just wrote actual factual. So basically it's facts on facts. It's not you making a guess. It's based on facts, okay? Inductive reasoning is based on guesses, but deductive reasoning is based on facts. With inductive reasoning, you're trying to get a conjecture or you're trying to make a conjecture. With deductive, you're trying to, like I said, make a logical conclusion. Okay, moving on. So inductive versus deductive. So you see in example 1 here, it says all humans are mortal. Harold is human, therefore Harold is mortal. So that's based on facts. So that would be deductive reasoning. Example 2, Harold is a grandfather, Harold is bald. Conclusion, all grandfathers are bald. That is based on inductive reasoning, and it's not a very good conclusion. So that would be an example of inductive reasoning. All right, now let's talk about the law of detachment. So the law of detachment is best. I'm not going to read all this because I'm going to be honest, it's confusing. Let me just give you the example. So you have if a ray is an angle bisector, then it divides the angle into two congruent angles. So basically, you're like, okay, based on that information, if BD bisects ABC, then you can assume that the two angles are congruent. So again, we took this part, angle bisector, okay? It divides it into two congruent angles. So again, angle bisector divides it into two congruent angles. All right, the law of syllogism. If the hypothesis leads to a conclusion and that conclusion leads to a second conclusion, then the original hypothesis will lead to the final or the second conclusion, okay? So for example, you got statement 1. If you break the law, then you go to jail. So if you break the law, let me use colors, y'all know how I like to do, then you go to jail. Statement 2 starts with the jail part. So I'm gonna use the same color that I used for the first jail part. And then, oops, different color. Okay, so then it says you lose your job. So this is a totally different statement. So the conclusion is basically going to take the if you break the law part. Let me zoom in so I can write. If you break the law, and then it goes straight to the second conclusion, which says you lose your job. Then you lose your job. And that's it. that's how you do it. Okay, so that's how the law of syllogism works. So again, just to reiterate, if you break the law, that goes first. Sorry if you can't see that anymore. And then you lose your job comes second. So basically, syllogism is when you skip the middleman. So I'm just going to write that over here. You skip the middle. Okay, so you skip the middle. So we skipped this part, and then we just join these two together. All right, so let's do a couple of these. Tell which law you're using for each example and make a valid conclusion. So statement 1. If two angles form a linear pair, then the two angles are supplementary. Statement 2. If two angles are supplementary, then they have a sum of 180. The sum of their measure is 180. So let's start. Two angles form a linear pair. Okay, next. Two angles are supplementary. The next, it picks up with that same statement, and then it ends with a different statement. So for the conclusion, we're going to cut out the middleman. Actually, let me use this blackish color. Okay, so we're going to cut this part out, and we're going to cut this part out because they're the same thing. And then if two angles form a linear pair, then the sum of their measures is 180. All right, and if you remember, that was syllogism. So that was syllogism. All right, so statement 1. Now we're on the second example. If two angles form a linear pair, then the two angles are supplementary. Angle A and angle B form a linear pair. Therefore, angle A and angle B are supplementary. Okay, or you can just say the measure of angle A plus the measure of angle B equals 180. And this would be the law of detachment. All right,